Let's face it, folks. Evangelical Christianity, it's like that distant relative who shows up unannounced, eats all your food, and then tries to convert your cat. They've become a dominant force in American politics, and frankly, it's enough to make you want to pray for a meteor, or at least a really strong antacid. These folks believe in the Bible, literally. They see the end times as an imminent reality, and they're convinced they have a front row seat to the apocalypse. Now, I'm all for freedom of religion. Hell, I support freedom of delusion. But when deeply held beliefs start shaping foreign policy, we've got a problem, especially when those beliefs involve a region as volatile as the Middle East. We're talking about a group that throws around terms like Armageddon and rapture with the casualness of discussing the weather. They believe the world is a cosmic battleground between good and evil, and they're certain they're on the right side. And let's not forget their obsession with Israel. Now don't get me wrong, Israel's a beautiful country, great falafel too, but for these folks, supporting Israel isn't just about geopolitics. It's about fulfilling biblical prophecy. They believe that the Jewish people must return to Israel to usher in the second coming of Christ. Makes you wonder if they've considered the travel costs and hotel availability for such a massive event. The problem is this kind of thinking has real-world consequences. It fuels conflict, justifies violence, and makes diplomacy feel like trying to negotiate a truce between a lion and a gazelle. In short, it's time we had a serious talk about the elephant in the room, the dangerous influence of evangelical beliefs on American foreign policy. Okay, so the end times, it's the evangelical version of a blockbuster movie franchise complete with sequels, prequels, and enough fire and brimstone to make a pyromaniac blush. But where did this whole end of the world as we know it obsession come from? Well, it's a long and winding road, folks, paved with ancient scriptures, fervent preachers, and maybe a dash of good old-fashioned fear-mongering. You see, the idea of an apocalypse isn't exactly new. It's been around for centuries, popping up in various religions and cultures. But the modern evangelical take on it really gained traction in the 19th century with the rise of dispensationalism. Think of it like this. Dispensationalism is like the Cliff's Notes version of the Bible, except instead of helping you pass a test, it tells you how the world is going to end. This belief system divides history into different periods or dispensations, each with its own set of rules and divine plans. And guess what? We're living in the last one, folks. The grand finale. The one where the curtain falls, the credits roll, and Jesus returns for an encore performance. Of course, this performance involves a lot of plagues, wars, and natural disasters. But hey, who needs a happy ending when you've got eternal salvation, right? The thing about dispensationalism is, it's a choose-your-own-adventure version of the Bible. You can cherry-pick verses, ignore historical context, and basically make it fit whatever narrative you want. And boy, have they. This brings us to the real kicker, the heart of the evangelical obsession with the Middle East, the rebuilding of the Jewish temple in Jerusalem. Now, to understand the evangelical fascination with Jerusalem, you gotta understand something. They see the Middle East less like a real place with real people and more like a giant game board for their apocalyptic fantasies. And Jerusalem? Well, that's the prime real estate, the coveted corner square on their end times monopoly board. According to their interpretation of biblical prophecies, the Jewish temple, destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD, must be rebuilt for the second coming to occur. Never mind the fact that there's a major holy site, the Dome of the Rock, sitting right where the temple used to be. Details, details. We're talking about divine prophecy here, folks. Who are we to question God's urban planning decisions? This belief has led to some pretty wacky ideas like calls to relocate the Dome of the Rock or even rebuild the temple alongside it. Because, you know, nothing says peace in the Middle East like cramming two major religious structures onto one of the most contested pieces of land on Earth. It's like trying to fit 10 pounds of crazy in a 5-pound bag. But here's the really scary part. This isn't just about theological debates or armchair prophecy interpretations. This belief has real-world implications. It fuels support for Israeli settlements in the West Bank, undermines peace efforts, and raises tensions in an already volatile region. It's like pouring gasoline on a bonfire and then handing out marshmallows. Here's a thought that might blow your mind, folks. What if I told you that this whole dispensationalism thing, this idea of the end times and the pivotal role of Israel, wasn't just some ancient prophecy? What if it was actually a relatively recent invention, something cooked up right here in the good old US of A? It's true. Dispensationalism, as we know it today, didn't really take off until the 19th century, and one of its biggest proponents wasn't some biblical scholar or theologian but a charismatic preacher named John Nelson Darby. Darby, an Anglo-Irishman, traveled to America in the late 1800s, spreading his unique brand of end-times theology like wildfire. And boy did it catch on. Now you might be wondering why this particular brand of biblical interpretation resonated so strongly in America. Well, for starters, it offered a simple black and white view of the world. Good versus evil, us versus them. It appealed to a nation built on the idea of manifest destiny, a nation that saw itself as exceptional, chosen by God to lead the world. Dispensationalism also conveniently placed America at the center of God's plan. Sure, the end times might be a bit messy, but hey, at least America was on the right side of the cosmic battle. It was a message that played well with a nation grappling with its newfound superpower status, a nation hungry for a sense of purpose on the world stage. It's no coincidence that dispensationalism took root in America, a nation founded by religious pilgrims seeking a new Jerusalem. Section 5. The Scofield Bible. Shaping Evangelical Beliefs. Let's talk about a book, folks, but not just any book. I'm talking about the Scofield Reference Bible, a book so influential, it's practically the evangelical equivalent of the Bible itself. Published in 1909, this wasn't your grandma's Bible filled with tissue-thin pages and that old book smell. This bad boy came loaded with commentary, footnotes, and cross-references, all pushing a very specific interpretation of Scripture, dispensationalism. Think of it like this. Imagine reading a Shakespearean play with footnotes written by a conspiracy theorist. Suddenly, Hamlet's just a pawn in a global Illuminati plot, and Lady Macbeth is secretly a lizard person. That's what the Scofield Bible did to the Bible. It took a complex, nuanced text and injected it with a potent dose of end-times ideology. The man behind this masterpiece of biblical interpretation was Cyrus Scofield, a lawyer-turned-preacher with a knack for self-promotion and a penchant for the Book of Revelation. Scofield's Bible became a runaway bestseller, embraced by preachers and lay people alike. It was easy to read, easy to understand, and it offered a clear roadmap to the apocalypse. What more could you ask for? The problem is, Scofield's interpretations weren't exactly based on, shall we say, sound scholarship. He cherry-picked verses, ignored historical context, and basically twisted the Bible to fit his own preconceived notions. But hey, who needs facts when you've got faith, right? And so, millions of Americans were fed a steady diet of Scofield's end-times theology, shaping their worldview and influencing their understanding of the Middle East. Section 6. A Narrow Vision, the Dangers of Biblical Literalism. Here's the thing about taking the Bible literally, folks. It's like trying to navigate the complexities of the 21st century using a first-century GPS. Sure, it might get you somewhere, but you're bound to run into some problems along the way, like, say, crashing headfirst into the wall of reality. See, the Bible is a complex and often contradictory text, written over centuries by different authors with different perspectives. It's a book filled with poetry, metaphors, historical accounts, and yes, even some wacky stuff that probably shouldn't be taken as a literal instruction manual for life. But that's the thing about biblical literalism. It leaves no room for nuance, interpretation, or, God forbid, critical thinking. It's a one-size-fits-all approach to faith, and unfortunately, that size doesn't fit everyone. It's like trying to squeeze the entire universe into a thimble. Something's got to give, and in this case, it's often reason, compassion, and a healthy dose of common sense. This rigid, literal interpretation of the Bible has some very real consequences, especially when it comes to the Middle East. It fuels conflict by reducing complex geopolitical issues to a simplistic battle between good and evil. It justifies violence by invoking ancient prophecies and divine mandates. And it makes diplomacy about as effective as a screen door on a submarine. Section 7. The Allure of Prophecy, Unraveling the Mystery. Why are we so obsessed with prophecy anyway? I mean, it's like a cosmic lottery ticket. We cling to these ancient predictions, these cryptic verses, hoping to decipher the winning numbers that will unlock the secrets of the future. But here's the thing about prophecy, folks. It's open to interpretation. And by interpretation, I mean you can pretty much make it say whatever the hell you want. Take the Book of Revelation, for example. It's the biblical equivalent of a psychedelic acid trip, filled with strange beasts, cryptic symbols, and enough fire and brimstone to make a dragon sweat. It's enough to make you wonder if the author had been hitting the communion wine a little too hard, but instead of appreciating it as a vivid piece of apocalyptic literature, some folks treat it like a literal news report from the future. They obsess over every detail, every symbol, every cryptic verse, convinced they hold the key to unlocking the end times. It's like trying to predict the stock market using a magic 8-ball. The problem is, this obsession with prophecy, this desire to force-fit current events into ancient predictions, can lead to some pretty dangerous conclusions. It fuels fear, stokes paranoia, and justifies all sorts of crazy behavior. It's like giving a loaded gun to someone who thinks they're playing a video game. Let's talk about Christian Zionism, folks. That peculiar love triangle between some American evangelicals, the State of Israel, and, well, God. It's a complicated relationship, fraught with theological baggage, political maneuvering, and enough historical irony to make your head spin. Now, on the surface, it might seem like a match made in heaven. You've got evangelicals, with their unwavering support for Israel, and Israel, with its need for powerful allies. It's a win-win, right? Well, not so fast. You see, for many evangelicals, supporting Israel isn't just about geopolitics or strategic alliances, it's about fulfilling biblical prophecy. They believe that the Jewish people must return to Israel to usher in the second coming of Christ. But here's the thing, this support often comes with strings attached. Evangelicals often push for policies that are in line with their own theological beliefs, even if those policies are detrimental to the cause of peace or the rights of Palestinians. It's like saying, I'll support you, but only if you follow my strict religious guidelines. This unholy alliance has some pretty troubling implications. It gives a theological veneer to what are essentially political decisions. It fuels the flames of conflict by reinforcing the idea of a cosmic battle between good and evil, and it often ignores the plight of the Palestinians, who are often relegated to the role of inconvenient bystanders in this end times drama. Remember the 1980s, folks? Big hair, shoulder pads, and the birth of a political force that would change the face of American politics. The moral majority. Led by the telegenic and oh-so-pious Jerry Falwell, the moral majority burst onto the scene, determined to inject their particular brand of conservative Christian values into the heart of government. It was a time when preachers traded in their pulpits for political platforms, and the airwaves were filled with sermons disguised as political commentary. The moral majority railed against abortion, homosexuality, and the decline of traditional family values. They were like that overzealous neighbor who keeps trying to impose their HOA rules on your life. Now you might be thinking, Bill, what's wrong with a little morality in politics? And you'd be right to a point. We all want our leaders to be ethical, compassionate human beings. But the moral majority's agenda wasn't about promoting some universal moral code. It was about imposing their specific, narrow interpretation of Christianity on everyone else. They were masters of fear-mongering, convincing their followers that America was on the brink of moral collapse, and that only they, the righteous few, could save the nation from the clutches of secular humanism and godless communism. It was a potent message, one that resonated with millions of Americans who felt left behind by the cultural changes of the 1960s and 1970s. The moral majority may have faded from the scene, but its legacy lived on in the rise of the religious right, a powerful voting bloc that continues to wield significant influence in American politics. These folks vote as a bloc. They donate heavily to political campaigns, and they're not afraid to flex their political muscle to get their way. They've become a force to be reckoned with, holding sway over everything from school board elections to presidential nominations. They're the kingmakers, the power brokers, the ones politicians have to court if they want to get elected. It's enough to make you wonder if we're living in a democracy or a theocracy. The problem is, the religious rights agenda often comes at the expense of others. They oppose LGBTQ+ rights, they want to restrict access to abortion, they fight against science education, and they seem hell-bent on turning America into a Christian nation, even though the Constitution explicitly forbids it. It's like they skipped over that whole separation of church and state part. They claim to be motivated by their faith, but it often seems like their real God is power. They're willing to compromise their principles, overlook hypocrisy, and turn a blind eye to corruption, all in the name of advancing their political agenda. It's enough to make you lose faith in faith itself. Here's a dirty little secret about the relationship between politicians and the religious right, folks. It's not about shared faith, it's about votes. Politicians, especially those on the right, have figured out that the best way to win elections is to pander to the religious right, to exploit their fears and insecurities for political gain. They'll show up at megachurches, Bibles in hand, spewing platitudes about faith and family values. They'll vow to fight against abortion, even if they don't actually give a damn about women's rights. They'll promise to defend religious freedom, while simultaneously chipping away at the rights of minorities. It's hypocrisy, plain and simple. And the saddest part is, it works. Millions of well-meaning Christians are being duped by these cynical operators, convinced that these politicians actually share their values. They're so focused on the culture wars, so obsessed with the end times, that they fail to see the real damage being done in the here and now. They're being fleeced by con artists in suits, their faith exploited for political gain. It's like a televangelist promising miracles in exchange for donations, only to use the money to buy a new private jet. We need to have a serious conversation, folks, about the role of religion in government. Because the line between church and state, that line that Thomas Jefferson said should be a wall of separation, is starting to look more like a dotted line, and in some cases, it's being erased entirely. When politicians start imposing their religious beliefs on everyone else, when they start using the power of government to promote one religion over others, we're no longer a democracy. We're a theocracy, and that's a dangerous path to go down. The beauty of America, the genius of our founding fathers, was the idea that we could have a nation where people of all faiths, or no faith at all, could live together in peace and harmony. But that ideal is under threat today, eroded by the relentless efforts of those who want to turn America into a Christian nation. They claim to be motivated by love, but their actions often speak louder than their words. They preach compassion, but they show little empathy for those who don't share their beliefs. They talk about freedom, but they seek to impose their narrow worldview on everyone else. So, how do we protect the integrity of our democracy? How do we safeguard the rights of all Americans, regardless of their religious beliefs? It's simple, folks. We need to rebuild that wall of separation between church and state, and we need to do it now, before it's too late. We need to elect leaders who understand that their responsibility is to uphold the Constitution, not to impose their religious beliefs on everyone else. We need to challenge those who exploit faith for political gain, who use religion as a weapon to divide and conquer. And most importantly, we need to have the courage to stand up for our own beliefs, even when they're unpopular. We need to speak out against intolerance, bigotry, and discrimination wherever we see it. That's the beauty of America, folks. We have the freedom to believe what we want, but we also have the responsibility to respect the beliefs of others. It's time to reclaim the true meaning of religious freedom, a freedom that protects the rights of all Americans, not just the privileged few. It's time to remind ourselves that we are one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.